I'm 81 years old, and this morning, like every morning for the past 6 years, I sat in this chair by the window and watched the light come in, that pale, unhurried light of early February. And I didn't say a word, not to anyone, not even to myself. I just sat and I breathed, and I let the silence do what silence does when you finally stop fighting it. It's a strange thing, arriving at peace. You spend so many years chasing it, describing it, telling others how to find it. And then one morning it's simply there, sitting across from you in an empty room, and you realize it was always there. You were just too loud to notice. I used to think peace was something you chose, a decision, a discipline. I would tell people, and I told a great many people a great many things, that inner calm was a practice, that you had to work for it, that it required effort and intention and above all the right words to describe it. I said this at dinner tables. I said it to colleagues. I said it to my wife, Eleanor, who would nod slowly and then look out the window at something I could never see. I chose peace, I told myself. For years I chose peace. What I didn't understand, what it took me until I was nearly 80 to understand, is that choosing peace for yourself while making noise in every room you enter is not peace at all. It is simply a quieter variety of selfishness. Let me go back. Let me try to tell this properly. I was born in 1944 in a terraced house in Shropshire, the eldest of four. My father was a man of few words, a postman, a gardener, a reader of books he never spoke about. My mother, by contrast, was warmth and conversation in equal measure. She talked the way some people sing, naturally, constantly, as if silence itself made her uneasy. I took after her. By the time I was in my 20s, I had already become the sort of man who arrives at a gathering and slowly, without quite meaning to, becomes its center. Not through cruelty, not through arrogance, through sheer volume. I had opinions about everything. I'd read widely, worked hard, traveled a little, and I had assembled from all of it a coherent philosophy of living that I was absolutely certain other people needed to hear. I became a secondary school teacher. History, it suited me rather perfectly. A man who loved the sound of his own reasoning, given a room full of young people required to listen. I was good at it, I think. My students mostly liked me. My colleagues respected me or said they did. I was, by all external measures, a man doing well. I met Eleanor in 1968. She was 24. I was 25. She had dark eyes and a way of listening that I mistook for many years for admiration. She would sit across from me at a table and watch me talk, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and she would occasionally nod or smile. And I thought, here is a woman who understands me. It wasn't admiration. I know that now. It was patience. And patience, unlike admiration, is not an infinite resource. We married in 1970. We had 2 children, our daughter Claire, born in 1972, and our son Thomas, born in 1975. They grew up in a house full of my voice, discussions at the dinner table that were really lectures, car journeys where I would hold forth about history, about politics, about the correct way to approach some problem one of them had mentioned, while the trees went past the window and nobody answered. I remember a specific evening. This would have been around 1983. Claire was about 11 when she came home from school with a piece of writing she'd done. A short story, I think. She was proud of it in that quiet, careful way children have when they're not sure if they're allowed to be. She put it on the table in front of me. I read perhaps 2 paragraphs before I began to offer improvements. I wasn't unkind. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't harsh or dismissive. I was thorough. I explained what worked and what didn't and why, and what she might try differently, and how a story ought to move. And by the time I'd finished, she had folded the paper in half and put it in her pocket. She didn't bring me her writing again. Not the next week, not the next year. Not when she went to university and began to write rather well, actually. I found this out later, from Eleanor. Not when she published a short piece in a local journal at 23. I found that out later, too. I didn't understand any of this at the time. I thought she'd simply moved on. Children do. They grow into their own worlds, and they stop needing you in the ways they once did. I told myself this. I believed it. There was a man I worked alongside for many years, a geography teacher named Raymond, quiet almost to the point of invisibility. He'd been at the school since before I arrived. He ate his lunch alone. He rarely attended the staff gatherings that I made a point of attending, and at which I made a point of being heard. I used to feel a mild, benevolent pity for Raymond. He seemed to me like a man who had given up on being known. What I didn't see, what I couldn't see, was that Raymond went home each evening to a wife of 30 years and 2 daughters who telephoned him every Sunday without fail, and that he had a garden he tended with such attentiveness that his neighbors used to walk past simply to look at it, and that he read poetry at night and kept a journal and was, in every way that actually matters, a man at peace with his own company. He retired in 1998. We had a small gathering for him in the staff room. I gave a brief speech. Raymond thanked everyone quietly and then left, and I thought nothing more of it. A few years ago, I drove past his house by accident. The garden was still immaculate. There were lights in the windows. I sat in the car for a long moment. I don't think I've stopped thinking about Raymond since. Then there was my closest friend of 20 years, a man named David, who I'd known since university. We had lunch every few months, David and I. Long lunches, the kind that go on into the afternoon. He was clever and funny and had, I always thought, the good fortune of being someone I could really talk to. In 1995, David's marriage ended, quietly, as these things sometimes do. No drama, just a slow uncoupling. He told me about it over lunch one Thursday in November. I remember he sat down and said, "I think I need to tell you something." And I remember I nodded. And I can see this now with the awful clarity of hindsight, I said something about a similar situation I had once observed, and from there, the conversation moved on to other things, as conversations do when one person steers them. David didn't say what he'd come to say. Not that day. Not ever, as it turned out. He moved away in 1997. We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years. Then we didn't. I told myself we'd drifted, as old friends sometimes do. I told myself it was natural. I told myself a lot of things. Eleanor tried to tell me something once. I've thought about this particular evening more times than I can count, so I can't be entirely certain now what was real and what I've constructed in the retelling. But the shape of it I know. It was 2001. We'd been married for 31 years. She came into the sitting room one evening, a Sunday, I think, and sat down across from me and said my name the way she sometimes did, not urgently, but with a kind of careful intention that I should by then have recognized. I had been reading. I kept one finger in the page. She said, "I feel as though I'm disappearing." And I said, and I'm not proud of this, but I need to say it plainly. I said, "You've been tired lately. We both have. The term's been difficult." She looked at me for a moment. Perhaps that's not quite right. She looked past me, at something just beyond my shoulder. "Yes," she said, "I suppose that's it." And she went back to the kitchen. I finished my chapter. I didn't know then what she had been trying to tell me. I didn't know that she had been carrying something for years, a hollowness, a loneliness that lives not in the absence of people but in the presence of one person who will not hear you, and that she had chosen that particular Sunday evening to try one more time to put it into words. I know this because she told me, years later, by which point it had settled into her like weather that's simply become the climate. She wasn't bitter about it. Eleanor was never bitter. That was one of her qualities I most admired and least deserved. She died in 2019, the 4th of March, a Tuesday. She'd been unwell for 2 years. Her heart, which had, I've sometimes thought, done a great deal more work than was ever asked of mine. The last few months she was very quiet, in a way that felt like the quietness of deep water. Not absence, something else. I was with her at the end. I held her hand and I didn't say a word. I'd like to think that was because I had finally learned. Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply had no words left. After she was gone, I sat in the hospital corridor for a long time. A nurse brought me a cup of tea I didn't drink. The corridor hummed with the ordinary business of the living, and I sat there with the extraordinary feeling of a man who has been talking his whole life and has suddenly, finally, run out of things to say. I drove home. I sat in the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked. The kettle stood cold on the counter. The chair where Eleanor used to sit in the mornings, the one by the radiator with the worn armrest, was empty. I sat there until it was dark. And for the first time in my life, in my honest life, I did not try to fill the silence with a single word. It came in. The silence came in the way cold comes in through an old window, slowly, through the edges of things. And it wasn't peace. Not yet. It was something much older and harder than peace. It was, I think, the sound of everything I had not listened to, arriving all at once. I need to tell you what's gone. Not in complaint. I want to be clear about that. The season for complaint passed some time ago. I'm simply telling you what is. Claire lives in Edinburgh now. She's 52. She has a life that is full and good and largely separate from mine. We speak on the telephone every few weeks. The conversations are warm and careful, the way conversations are between people who love each other but have learned to keep certain doors closed. I understand why those doors are closed. I closed them myself a long time ago without knowing I was doing it. Thomas is in Australia, has been since 2004. He comes back every 2 or 3 years, and we have good visits, genuine ones, I think. But there are years of distance between us, and not merely the geographical kind. I know this. I don't pretend otherwise. David, I looked him up a few years ago. He's well, I understand. Remarried, happy by the look of it. I didn't reach out. What would I have said? I'm sorry I kept talking over the one thing you needed me to hear. There's no door to knock on for that particular conversation. And Eleanor is simply gone. There are questions I will never get to ask her, things I should have said in quiet moments that I instead spent correcting, advising, contributing. There is the version of our marriage that might have existed, the one where she didn't spend 30 years feeling, as she once told me so gently, like a guest in her own sitting room. I think about that version sometimes, not with anguish. I'm past anguish, with something quieter, the way you might hold a stone that has smoothed over years of sitting in a river and simply feel the shape of it. I don't blame anyone, not even myself particularly. I didn't know what I was doing. That is not an excuse. It is simply the truth, and truth, I've found, is almost always simpler than we want it to be. The house is quiet now, a permanent kind of quiet, the kind that comes after everyone has finished waiting, and I sit in it. I have learned to sit in it. I'm not going to tell you what to do. That would be my old self, and I've tried to leave him behind, though he surfaces occasionally like driftwood. But I would like to offer you something, not instruction, simply reflection. If you are someone who talks a great deal, who fills rooms, who advises, who always has something to add, I would gently invite you to consider what happens in the moments after someone you love says something small and unfinished, something that isn't quite a question and isn't quite a statement, something that needs room around it. Do you give it room? What I didn't understand, for decades I didn't understand this, is that presence is not the same as attendance. You can be in a room, reliably and faithfully in a room, for 40 years and still leave someone entirely alone. Presence is something different. It is the act of making yourself genuinely available to what another person is trying to give you, especially when it's small, or unfinished, or offered without fanfare. The people who love us don't need our wisdom, mostly. They need our attention. There's a book I found too late, perhaps not too late, but later than I should have. Active Listening by Carl Rogers. It said in plain, measured language what took me half a century of living to dimly grasp. That hearing is not the same as listening, that listening is a full-body act of generosity. I read it at 76 and sat with it for a long time afterward. There's another, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. I'd known of it for years, of course. Everyone has. I finally read it properly after Eleanor died, and there's a line in it. Your children are not your children. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts. That stopped me entirely. I had given my children my thoughts for 30 years. I had not, nearly enough, given them my love in the way love actually needs to be given, quietly, attentively, without agenda. And there's a smaller book, one you may not have come across, Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. Not about listening exactly, but about living inside questions without rushing to resolve them. I wish I had read it at 25. I read it at 78 instead. I want to say something here, and I want to say it plainly. If you are carrying something heavy, grief or confusion or a loneliness that doesn't quite have a name, please don't do what I did, which was to think my way around it for years, talking at it from all angles without ever sitting still enough to feel it. Please talk to someone trained to listen. A professional, a counselor, a therapist, someone who has given their life to the work of hearing people properly. There is no shame in that. There is only sense. I'm not a wise man. I want to be honest about that. I'm someone who spent a long time being loud and who found stillness too late to do everything he might have done with it. If anything in this reaches you, I'm glad, but please take it to someone better equipped than an old man in a chair by a window. I'm 81. The house is still this morning. There's a thin frost on the garden. I can see it from here, white along the grass, precise and unhurried, the way the world arranges itself when no one is asking anything of it. I have my tea. I have the light coming in. I have the silence, which is no longer empty to me. I know what lives in it now. I know what I couldn't hear for 50 years because I wouldn't stop speaking. It was all there, all along, underneath the arguments, underneath the advice and the opinions, and the constant, exhausting need to be heard. All the things that mattered, all the small, offered things I walked past without stopping. I hear them now. It's a strange comfort that, arriving at understanding, not in time to change much, but arriving nonetheless. If any part of this reached you, if something in it settled somewhere and stayed, then I'm glad I finally used my voice for something worth saying. There are more reflections like this on this channel, and I'll be back in whatever quiet mornings remain to me. For now, though, I'm just going to sit here for a little while and listen.